How's it going, everyone? Welcome to a Football for Fun video. I am Daniel. I am a Texans fan, and yeah, as many of you know, if you are watching this video, you are likely a big enough football fan to where you would know that NFL Quarterback Season 2 came out. Might be a little confusing because Season 1 was in 2023, but they didn't do it in 2024 because, from what I understand, they couldn't find people to do it. So they found people to do it in 2025. The quarterbacks featured are Joe Burrow, Jared Goff, and Kirk Cousins. Now, actually, fun fact: this graphic isn't from the Netflix thing. I just came up with it because in 2023 they had a pretty good graphic. It was just like this with the quarterbacks on it, but I didn't really see one for this year. So I just thought, well, why not just throw something up there, right? Just gotta have something. So NFL quarterback, you have Joe Burrow, Kirk Cousins, and Jared Goff, right? So, what is my opinion? I mean, obviously, not really too surprised as far as like the production, storylines, or anything like that. I do think there are a few interesting notes. So, there were some mental notes that I made. One that I kind of realized before we actually get into the football stuff is that they do lean into the family aspect. Even Joe Burrow with his parents, but Jared Goff with his wife. They talked about his wedding, and Kirk Cousins, obviously, he's kind of a family guy at this point. So, obviously, the majority of NFL quarterback is about the football and the storylines and things like that. But they do have just a good enough portion to family life as well, to where it might draw some like some target audience of like wives and girlfriends and things like that. I think 2 years ago, my dad almost convinced my mom to watch it, and with kind of the pitch that they talked about the family. I don't know if they ended up watching it together or not, but I'm sure my dad did. But just wanted to mention that. I thought that was a pretty interesting observation. First thing I noticed from the show was like, of course, Kirk Cousins uses great clips. Like, why wouldn't he, right? Why wouldn't Kirk Cousins use great clips? Okay, but on a serious note, so I only watched the first episode, to be fair, and I do think honestly it's kind of unfortunate that they kind of do it to where like all of them come out at the same time, because it would be cool if there was some kind of intrigue. But I also guess I do understand you don't want to like stretch it out 8 weeks or whatever. It is also kind of unfortunate, and not that we can really do anything about it, that we live in this social media era to where like anecdotes are just gonna get spoiled if you look at Instagram, which honestly nothing really like new came out. Like I think a lot of like the quotes that we got and things like that. Like Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins have some interesting quotes, but I think a lot of that was like stuff we already knew. There wasn't really anything groundbreaking. But what I did find interesting was that in the first episode they basically went over, you know, each quarterback's week one experience slash their off-season experience, and kind of like went each by each. So Jared Goff, now actually with Jared Goff, they actually kind of went way back to the trade with LA to Detroit. And I think what NFL quarterback does to you is kind of makes you realize things you might forget about. Not that you like completely forgot he was on the Rams, but you don't really associate Jared Goff as a Ram anymore. And then there was even some stuff with like Joe Burrow. You might forget the injury with like Kirk Cousins. You might forget like the free agency, aspect that he got hurt and things like that. By the way, like side note, I was like trying to like remember. Sorry, it was especially itchy today. So like there's something funny with like Kirk Cousins. Like just total side note. Like I think the Vikings were, maybe they were 5-4 when Kirk Cousins got hurt with the Achilles, and then I think they went 6-4, and I think that was the Josh Dobbs sort of Linsanity run, right? And then like they kind of sucked. They finished 7-10. But I thought it was funny, like Kirk Cousins like had a quote. He's like, "Yeah, you like you sit back and you're hurt and you realize you're not that important anymore." And I'm like, well, I see what you're saying, but Kirk Cousins was pretty freaking important to the Vikings. As soon as he was hurt, they sucked. So just thought that was a little funny. But anyway, Jared Goff, they talked about the sort of trade, and he had kind of a quote basically like he wished that there was more maturity behind the trade. Essentially, Sean McVay gave Jared Goff a call, and 30 seconds later, like on Twitter and things like that. Like it was officially announced. Which I thought was good perspective, because I think at first Jared felt kind of down that like the Rams wanted to like move on from him so bad, it apparently ended ugly or whatever. But then, Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, I believe, they're like giving him calls and all like hype, and he kind of has this perspective to where like, okay, even if I wasn't like wanted in LA, I'm really wanted here. And obviously he did address the fact that like us fans, and I say us, I'm sure I'm including that as well. We thought that Jared Goff was kind of going there, like his career was gonna die. But he also saw it as an opportunity to kind of lay the foundation for the Lions to like win for years to come. I think also a lot of us forget. Jared Goff was still young when he got traded. He's only 30 now, and uh this was 3 years ago, right? No, 4 years ago, because it was the offseason of 21. So Jared Goff was only 26 when the trade was made. I think maybe a lot of us would have subconsciously thought he was like later 20s or even 30, just given that just like the talk of like, okay, his career is going there to die. Maybe not. Maybe we just all thought Detroit sucks, but he was only 26. He had the whole rest of his career ahead of him, right? So yeah, I just thought that was pretty interesting. They talked about the trade and things like that, and then on top of facing the Rams in the wild card, basically in 2023, they also faced in 2024, and that was a pretty dramatic game that went to overtime, which Jared's team won. Now, Joe Burrow's team did not win Week One, as many of you might remember. They lost to the New England Patriots in Week One. Obviously, very notorious for their slow starts. I mean, it was interesting. Like, you just see these random anecdotes. Like, Joe Burrow plays the piano. I think the idea was to help with his wrist, but one of the opening scenes being just him, like, playing E minor or whatever on the piano was pretty interesting. But yeah, even for, like, Joe Burrow, who is, like, kind of like, talking about family, Joe, they had a little scene with like his mom and dad and just like about like how supportive they were and like everything like that. So that was, pretty cool. They lost in week one of last year to the Patriots. I'm trying to remember if there are any other interesting anecdotes about Joe Burrow. I talked about his hairstyle, which like honestly, on the one hand, I don't really care, but on the other hand, I guess it's cool, but on the other hand, it's like a little weird, but okay. But like it kind of influenced Zach Taylor's kid, who like influenced other kids from the school. So like I don't know, good for him, I guess. Trying to see if I remember. Yeah, Burrow plays the piano. I don't really think they talked a lot about like his family and like upbringings and things like that, and the fact that like his first scholarship offer was from his dad's school, so he's like, okay, like what's that though? Then like he got more offers, and it's like okay, he was gonna play basketball, which I don't honestly, it was a fact I didn't know, but also I'm not surprised because I mean, so many athletes, like so many football players, like played other sports or tried other sports, so it didn't really surprise me. I actually didn't know that Joe Burrow was had played basketball, and they were actually kind of trying to focus in on that. Then obviously Kirk Cousins had a lot of sort of storylines. Kirk Cousins, just like obviously his Achilles tear, and they kind of went over the recovery. It was actually pretty interesting. Like, apparently, I didn't really realize this, but like, Kirk Cousins was the first quarterback to tear his Achilles and then start games the next season since like, was it Trent Dilfer, I think, in like 2000 or something like that. But then I'm thinking Aaron Rodgers did it like probably a day later, right? Which is kind of interesting that like two guys, I didn't even realize that was a thing. Like, I honestly would have assumed that like it was fairly common for like and maybe like other players do it, but like you tear an Achilles and then recover. I guess it goes to show like how deep in 2025 we are, that like it's kind of the standard, and maybe like 5-10 years ago you weren't expected to sort of like start games the next season. But because I assume I assume the Falcons and Steelers played on Sunday, and then Aaron Rodgers didn't play till that Monday. So I guess that would explain why Cousins was the first, but then Rodgers followed suit. Rodgers tore his Achilles, right? I'm pretty sure of that. Yeah. I mean, I didn't like fact check any of this. I just thought that was pretty funny. So obviously, Kirk Cousins, they go over sort of the free agency, and then like, the draft and things like that. And Kirk obviously had his quotes, which again doesn't really surprise anyone, to where he felt misguided, and if if he had known that both teams would draft a quarterback this high, then like he would have considered staying in Minnesota, or I don't know if he had other options back then. I guess maybe Pittsburgh is kind of what I was thinking would have been the other one. I don't know. I actually don't know. It is kind of interesting to think, like, kind of revisionist. Like, if Kirk Cousins knew that both teams were going to draft quarterbacks, does he just stay with Minnesota? Is there another team he could sign with? But anyway, Kirk Cousins, signs the contract with Atlanta, and then, they draft Michael Penix, and they went over his Week 1 game, which was a loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. One thing Kirk Cousins really honed in on is that the Falcons were using so many more motions than he was used to, like pre-snap motions. Like he was saying something like there were like 45 different ways to like do the motions, was which was a lot for him. And then they lost Week 1 because they kind of like messed up the motion. I assume it was on Kirk. I actually didn't really catch that, but I'm pretty sure it was on Kirk. And yeah, he was kind of seems like he was kind of complaining about it. I'm not exactly sure like what to make of it. Maybe it's just like, I don't know. It just seemed like it was a lot for him. Also, by the way, they just kind of showed a cut. The quarterback coach for the Falcons, Houston Texans legend, TJ Yates. So shout out to him. I'm sure no one else watching this video caught on to that. Houston Texans legend, our first quarterback to win us a playoff game. Little known fact. You would have thought it was Matt Schaub, or maybe if you were really casual, that was CJ Stroud, but no. TJ Yates, Houston Texans legend. First quarterback in Houston Texans history to win a playoff game. All right, so back to the regularly scheduled program. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. Obviously, with Kirk Cousins, they honed in on his like family and things like that. Kirk Cousins just has some interesting personality traits, which I don't really have a problem with, but obviously he goes to great clips, and on the way to somewhere in the Bahamas where they weren't vacationing, they were doing some procedure for his Achilles that you couldn't do in the United States. He was like, someone's like, "What'd you do?" He's like, "Yeah, I read books and I watched the Barbie movie." And it's like, okay, interesting. And then he referenced some Santa Claus is coming to town song. You'll have to watch the episode to kind of know where I'm coming from there. There's a point there. I'm just gonna make you watch it, but actually probably no one really cares at this point. But yeah, anyway, so I thought it was really interesting, very interesting anecdotes, stories, and things like that. Only got to watch one episode so far. I'll probably fire up episode 2 later tonight. Right now it is 10:43 p.m., so we're kind of getting to the end of it here, and I have an early morning tomorrow, so I'm not exactly sure, but I'm sure when Isaac and I have our special episode on Thursday, you should tune in. Thursday, I don't know what time, like 7, 8, something like that, but definitely make sure to tune into Football for Fun on Thursday. We'll probably talk more about quarterback, maybe watch an episode together, something like that. I have no idea. I mean, we'll see what is to come. And I think that is really it as far as just like major points I wanted to sort of hit home. We'll see how the rest of the episodes go and like what transpires and things like that. But yeah, I hope everyone enjoys their day, enjoys your evening, morning, whatever time it is, and I'll see you for the next video. Bye.